Chapter 5. Michael gestured to the footprints again. They're pointed toward the hole. He turned his gaze back to Jenna. He didn't go down in it and climb up again on this side. He gestured in the direction that the tracks beneath him were facing, toward the hole. He went in this way. He gestured in the opposite direction. And that way. He went in the hole twice, from different sides. Jenna stared down at the hole, her body vibrating. Is he? She stopped. Jenna sat on the edge of the gaping laceration, then pushed off into the pit. She immediately submerged as if something yanked her down, engulfing her in the earth. She screamed, gasping for air, dirt flying down her throat. Michael shouted, "Jenna!" His heart hammering, Michael froze, petrified, watching the writhing soil in terror, unsure what to do. He couldn't just jump in, or he'd sink with Jenna. He wondered if he could find a stick, or something to pull her up with. But by the time he came back, she could have already suffocated. He could use his rifle, but he understood the danger of the round in the chamber. Knowing that he was running out of time, he decided to just jump in and hope that he didn't sink too far. Michael set his rifle on the ground, held his breath, and bent his knees, preparing to jump. Then, he saw Jenna's hand thrust from the earth. Michael sprung up, and almost slipped as he dashed to the other side of the cavity. On the edge of the fissure, he dropped hard onto his belly, not caring that the wind had been knocked from him, and clasped Jenna's hand. Leaping back to his feet, he heaved with all his might, his arms straining. Then, Jenna's head burst from the soil as she gasped for air. Keeping a firm grip on Jenna's hand, Michael took a step toward the ridge of the pit, peering down to see Jenna's head and neck protruding from the dirt. She coughed and blew her nose. Then her other hand emerged from the earth to wipe her face. Michael blurted, "Are you okay?" Panting as if her lungs were made of lead, Jenna glanced up at Michael, her face scrunched and one eye closed. "Yeah, I'm okay." She spat, swished her tongue around in her mouth, then spat again. Michael bent down on one knee, preparing to pull again as he took his right hand off of Jenna's and held it out to her. "Take my other hand." Jenna glanced back up at Michael. "I felt something." Michael's eyes darted from Jenna's deep blue eyes to the dirt that enveloped her chest and back. "Tell me about it when you're up." "No, my hand touched something. I'm gonna get it out." Michael shook his head emphatically, blurting, "No, just come up." Jenna let go of Michael's hand, failing to free herself from his tight grasp, as she spoke in a trembling voice. "I can stand. I just stumbled and fell, that's all." Michael clenched Jenna's wrist, thinking he must be hurting her, as he inched closer to the edge of the rectangular crevice. His feet almost went over as he spoke with as much seriousness as he could muster. "Jenna, come back up, now." Jenna's eyes started watering, dust cementing to her cheeks like malevolent ticks. "It might be important. We need to know what all this is." Michael sighed. "Fine." He sat down, his legs dangling over the edge. "I'll get it. Just come back up." "You don't know where it is." Michael persisted. "I can find it." Instead of strengthening her argument, Jenna took a deep breath, clasped her eyes shut tight, plugged her nose, then plunged her head back into the loose soil, her hand yanking free from Michael's grip as he toppled forward. He shouted, "Jenna!" He shot up, his eyes darting across the dirt, waves rising and falling as Jenna squirmed underneath. Michael prepared himself to jump in again, then Jenna erupted from the soil, gasping to fill her dust-bombarded lungs. Michael knelt down again and shot out his hands. "Jenna, come on!" Jenna coughed as she took both of Michael's hands and jumped as he tugged with all his might. As Jenna slowly ascended, she positioned her legs against the crumbly dirt wall and one hand atop the ridge of the fissure, then pushed upward. After straining effort and sore muscles, she stood on her hands and knees in the leaves that lined the edge of the pit's gaping mouth. She rolled onto her back, exhausted. Finally on solid ground, Jenna stood unsteadily. She blew her nose and shut her eyes as she frantically wiped, more like smacked, her face with her hand, and coughed again as she brushed the brown stains that littered her clothing. Michael placed his hands on her shoulders. "You okay?" Jenna vigorously scratched her head, her fingernails digging into her scalp. "Yeah, I'm okay." She tugged at her hair, dust and pebbles cascading to the ground like sinister hail. Michael thought about letting go of her shoulders, but was seized with a sudden fear that she would jump in again. He didn't think that she would, but slightly tightened his grip on her shoulders anyway. "You're sure?" Jenna nodded, looking somewhat disoriented. "Yeah, I'm sure." She looked back to the pit. "I lost my flashlight." Michael immediately clasped Jenna's wrists and dashed backward, yanking her toward him. Jenna recoiled, then squinted her eyes in the bright light of Michael's headlamp. "Ow, Michael!" Michael kept a firm grip on Jenna's wrists, speaking clearly and mercilessly through his teeth. "Don't go in there." Jenna tugged her arms away from Michael's to no avail. "I'm not going back in there." Michael stared for a moment. "Don't." He let go of Jenna. Jenna turned around, scanned the filthy ground, then bent over and picked up two objects, one of which was her not-lost red flashlight. Michael assumed that she had dropped them when he yanked her away from the grave. Jenna straightened and turned back to Michael. "I found this in there." Jenna held out a white, shimmery object that fit almost perfectly in her palm. It was elliptical, but curved inward on one side, reminding Michael of a hearing aid. The top was bent inward not by design, short wires drooping from the tiny crevices and lacerations along the polished metal. Jenna asked, "Do you know what it is?" Michael scanned his eyes over it, then shook his head. "No." He took it from Jenna's hand, studying it. As Michael rotated it, examining from different angles, he heard the unpleasant sound of what he assumed was dirt rattling inside the electronics and falling out onto his fingers. He handed the object back to Jenna. "I don't know what that is." Jenna took the object and slid it back into her pocket. She shivered, crossing her arms as an icy wind blew in, branches wriggling and leaves swirling in the air. Michael came to the conclusion that her jacket was indeed not a windbreaker. Jenna's cheeks flushed red. "Well, now what do we do?" Michael glanced up at the beautiful, star-spangled night sky, the gargantuan arm of the Milky Way stretching across the black abyss in a gorgeous, silvery glimmering ring. He turned his glance back to Jenna as he unzipped his jacket. "We go home." Jenna's eyes widened. "What?" she blurted. "We can't just leave." Michael slid one arm out of his jacket sleeve. "The trail ends. There's nothing more we can do." "We can try to pick it up again." Michael shook his head as he took his jacket in both hands, feeling the harsh wind sweep under his gray sweatshirt, scraping across his fragile skin like an icy knife. "If we go home now, we'll be back before morning." Jenna clenched her fists. "So?" Michael stepped close to Jenna. "So? Do you want your parents waking up to see that you sneaked out?" Jenna opened her mouth, then closed it. Michael knew from the very beginning that Jenna was stressed beyond her breaking point and wasn't thinking clearly. Even though Michael was panicked inside for Fritz, he knew that he wasn't nearly on edge as Jenna was. It seemed her anxiety was intensifying by the minute, and Michael's was too. But Michael had practiced stress management ever since he was 6, ever since his night terrors started. He knew how to stay calm, for the most part. Plus, he knew what he was doing when he was walking in the woods and tracking Fritz. But neither of them expected a mysterious person, a broken tree, a deep grave in the earth, or a metallic object. Something strange happened the previous night, and they both knew it. Jenna glanced from Michael to the grave and back again. "You're sure it's a dead end, and that there's nothing else we can do right now, and that we should go home?" Michael nodded, stopping in front of Jenna. "Positive," he thought. "I think so. Pretty sure." He draped his jacket around Jenna and let it hang on her shoulders. "We'll come back at the same time tomorrow. Now that we know where to go, we'll get back here fast. And then we'll start the search again. I promise." Jenna nodded, wiping her red nose as snot seeped from it. She cuddled in Michael's jacket like a child snuggling a stuffed animal. She must have been freezing. Michael stood at Jenna's side and placed his arm across her shoulders. "I'll lead the way back." After taking a few steps alongside Michael, Jenna suddenly announced, "I can't take your jacket." Michael rubbed Jenna's back. "It's okay. I'm not cold. I have a sweatshirt." He knew that his slight warmth wouldn't last very long, immediately feeling the frigid wind plunder his defenseless body. Jenna was silent for a moment. "You're sure?" Michael nodded, pretending not to notice the goosebumps taking shape along his arms. "I'm okay. Please keep it. You can give it back to me when we split at the gas station." Jenna nodded, tears in her eyes. "Okay." Jenna had hoped that she would feel warmer as she pedaled, but she felt no difference in temperature. No escape from the cruel wind scraping icy needles across her helpless body, no matter how much it shivered and wept, on its knees begging for mercy from the heartless cold. Her house loomed above her, the lights out, and the bright moon peeking from behind the brown shingles on the roof. The grass beside the driveway was white and shimmery with frost. Other than the rustling bushes and fleeting garbage, there was not a single movement in the neighborhood, as if it were deserted, devoid of life. As Jenna approached the driveway, she stepped off her bike and walked it inside the garage as quietly as she could. She pulled the house key from her pocket, unlocked the front door, and crept inside, fiercely aware of every tiny movement she made. She panicked for a split second as her entire body felt a blazing fire, as if she were tossed into a scorching desert. Then, she realized it was because she entered her warm, cozy home, her nerves rejoicing at the salvation from the malevolent, freezing cold. Jenna tiptoed upstairs, went past her bedroom, and into the shower. After changing into her pajamas, she snuck into her room and hid her dirty clothes under her bed, pondering how she could fool her parents into thinking that she had no clothes missing, and she didn't go outside that night. Jenna sat on her bed and studied the white, glistening object in her hand. She stroked her fingers across the hard, cold surface. She rotated it, glancing at it from different angles, then saw small indentations on one side. To her, they appeared to be letters. Jenna held the object close to her eye, examining the engraved markings the best she could. The scratches, dark shades of what looked like rust, and crumpled form of the object made the words difficult to decipher. She could make out an A, an F, and a C on the first short line. On the line below, she could make out an O and the number 76. After squinting her eyes and tilting her head, she noticed that the O on the bottom line had a C etched inside it. Not an O then, the copyright symbol. Jenna glanced at the clock, her eyes widening as she realized that it was nearly 2 in the morning. She hastily slid the object under her bed, slid open the door to her pink closet, grabbed a green pillow and pink blanket, and threw them over the object. After checking it excessively, ensuring herself that the object was invisible from any angle, Jenna hopped into bed, pulling the pink covers over herself and curling almost into a fetal position. She laid there for what felt like an eternity, her mind refusing to fall asleep, insisting that it must concentrate on Fritz and everything that her and Michael had found that night. Jenna shut her eyes, but her mind still persisted, flashing vivid images of curled, shivering, dirty, bloody, traumatized Fritz under the back of her eyelids. She felt a swelling in her chest and salty water in her eyes. She let herself cry. The trees violently thrashed their branches in the air, as if they were attempting to rip the house off of its foundation, or shatter the windows and tear everyone from their sleep. After Jenna returned his jacket, Michael finally started warming, except for his face that tensed and stung, frigid in the frosty twilight. As quietly as he could manage, Michael cautiously slid open the garage door. After the gape was wide enough for his liking, he ducked under it, dragged his bike inside, then shut the door softly. He tiptoed slowly and patiently to his room, preparing himself to hide if Dad or Thomas burst from their rooms. Michael contemplated what he would say if he was caught. He couldn't just say he was getting a snack or using the restroom, because he was in his dirty outdoor clothes, with his backpack and loaded rifle strapped tightly to himself. He could say that he heard a noise outside, and decided not to tell Dad for some obscure reason. He could say that the noise was scary, so he loaded his rifle, but why would he have a backpack full of hiking supplies? When Michael reached his room, he closed the door as softly as possible, with a slight creak, and locked it. He changed into his pajamas, threw his dirty clothes under his bed, and frantically wiped any dirt off of himself with his hands. He looked at the clock, then shook his head in discontent. Michael walked over to his bed, watching Teddy's eyes follow his every move. He sat on his bed and pressed Teddy to his chest, stroking the soft yellow fur. He spoke to it. "Good night, Teddy." He set the bear back on the bed, then slid himself under the covers. Michael made sure Teddy was watching him, then closed his eyes. He tensed, feeling reality slipping away from him. Michael recoiled at the scent of water vapor and the sensation of grass tickling his arms and legs. Trees encircled the vast field, the wind so calm it was almost imperceptible. Michael tried to move, but he couldn't. His eyes locked on the figure before him. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, skipping away from him. Her blonde hair flailed behind her as she ran barefoot through the tall grass that left green stains along her long, white dress. She approached the surrounding tree line, and somehow, Michael felt the wondrous excitement that bubbled inside of her. Michael's eyes shot open and darted across the ceiling. He sat up and glanced around for a long moment, taking in the image of his darkened room, faint light seeping in through the tiny crevices between the curtains at his window, shimmery dust specks whirling slowly along the thin beam. Michael turned to Teddy, who stared back lifelessly, except for the smile on his black thread of a mouth. Michael looked at the clock. It was nearly 5 in the morning. He had been asleep for almost 3 hours, but it certainly didn't feel like it. He laid back down in bed, watching Teddy's eyes intently focus on his. Although Michael was relieved that it wasn't a nightmare, he still felt apprehensive about future dreams. They were getting weirder, more colorful, more vivid, more real. And the one he just had, he was fixed in place, paralyzed, helpless to do anything if something bad happened, if something scared him, if something chased him, if something attacked him, if it was to swallow him whole and watch him rot in its writhing guts. Michael desperately wanted to tell Dad and Thomas about his dreams, because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't get help. Not just afraid, he was mortified. He didn't want night terrors again. They already ruined enough of his childhood. Why couldn't he just move on and pretend like it never happened, like he was just a normal kid? But he knew that getting help would take time away from searching for Fritz, which he decided was much more important. He shut his eyes again, hoping not to have any more dreams. Jesse sat at the glittery table, watching as joyful Mike ran and leapt tirelessly with a group of ecstatic friends. He dashed from the show stage to the entrance of the arcade room, 2 friends darting after him, almost running into anyone who passed by. "He is fast." Janet's voice broke Jessie from her trance, as she almost forgot who she was sitting across from. Jessie turned her attention to Janet with a smile. "Yeah, he is. He tells me he's gonna be a runner." Janet nodded. "He's faster than me now." Jessie chuckled. "Luckily, he's not faster than me." They both laughed. Then a thundering mechanical roar pierced their ears, grasping their attention. Another deafening bellow as they startled, whirling toward the show stage. Jessie blinked, shocked to see the 3 animatronics flailing rapidly, as if having seizures. Their rapid movements became increasingly out of control, their arms hurling further from their bodies with each violent thrash. The remorseless screams of gears and pistons converged into one resounding, screeching drone. The room reeked of burning paper and plastic. Engineers gathered around the stage, not daring to approach the mechanical limbs tearing through the air. Jessie stood up and took a few steps toward the stage. She felt something small and warm in her palm, and glanced down to see Mike grabbing her hand, his friends lining up beside him as he looked up to his mother with a smile. Jessie held his hand, nearly enveloping it in hers as she smiled back. She noticed slight movement in the corner of her eye and turned to see an employee, wearing a yellow mascot costume, giving a lifeless gaze to the frenzied mechanical creatures. Jessie returned her attention to the purple stage, where the robotic bear, rabbit, and chicken were still wavering their limbs and whirling on their stands with exponential velocity. A slick, black substance oozing from the crevices in their metallic flesh. Jessie was suddenly gripped with concern, as the vision of them suddenly topping over and crashing into someone flashed across her mind. It didn't seem like anyone was close enough to the stage to be injured, but the idea still weighed heavily on her consciousness. Jessie's hair stood on end as Mike's hand suddenly slipped from hers. She turned her gaze toward where she last saw him, to view nothing but the glitter-covered tile and Mike's puzzled friends. Jessie turned around in a circle, scanning the area. "Mike?" Her heart hammered, blood curdling, spine chilling. "Mike? Michael?"